afternoon, everybody. Kia ora koutou. It's nice to be sitting here. Dion? Where's Dion? Thank you very much for being here for the Strategy and Policy Committee briefings this afternoon, where we're going to take a look at regional spatial planning. The staff will lead us through a number of slides, and then we're going to do something a little bit different, as I'll be throwing out a question for us as councillors to discuss from slide 7 on. So from slide 1 to 6, the staff will go through those slides, and I welcome questions. Then from slide 7, the fun begins. So let's start.
Kia ora tātou. For those watching the live stream, Amy Allison. I am the Director of Strategy and Planning here at ECAN. This is a really important piece of work, and we're really pleased to start the conversation on this important topic. And that's all I'm going to say, because I'll hand it over to my team. And we also have Patrick Lindsay here, who is leading our strategic transition unit, in case there are some questions that are more at the more strategic end. But obviously we're in your hands as much as you are in ours. So I'll pass over to my team, and they can introduce themselves.
So kia ora, you've all met me. I'm Lisa Jenkins. I'm Planning Manager, and I've got with me Amanda Thompson, and she's the team lead. And so there's 2 planning teams. Amanda leads one of them, the plan alignment team, and her job in the plan alignment team is to really work with district councils across the region and support them in aligning our plan frameworks. And up until now, that's been under the regional policy statement, but sort of going into the new system, she's really thinking about how we can continue that sort of really good work under the new system. So, so I'm just going to crack into it. We've only really got 10 slides, and we've got 2 hours, so we're just going to kind of frame the conversation really in these slides, but it's a workshop, so it's really about a conversation for the table. So we'll, feel free to interrupt as we're going through, and have discussion as well as we go. The purpose really is to just start a bit of a shared understanding of what the regional spatial planning will look like under the proposed new resource management system. And we're going to do that just with a really brief overview of what the Planning Bill and the Natural Environment Bill tell us at the moment, looking at what will likely be in the new combined regional framework, what the role of a regional spatial plan is, and where non-statutory spatial plans fit in that framework, and then also just looking at what's the early work that's underway to prepare us to be able to give the decision makers a decision to make when it comes to it with the spatial plan. So to make sure that we're ready to deliver a spatial plan in the timeframes. Right. So just to start, and sorry, I'm kind of having trouble with seeing you or seeing what I'm reading, so I'm going to be off and yeah. Okay, so what's under the new legislation? So I think there's still a lot of uncertainty. There's still bills, and there's still a whole lot of national direction to come as well that we haven't seen. But what we do know is that we're moving to a system with one combined regional plan, and that will have 3 components. It will have a spatial plan component, a natural environment chapter, and land use chapters. And those 3 components will need to work together. There's a funnel system So there's the national direction kind of sits at the top, and they're expecting to kind of see less as we go through the tunnel. So it's the funnel, not the tunnel. So we'll, starting with the national direction, that'll kind of set the scene, I guess, and then in the regional spatial plan, that's where we kind of have to show what are the outcomes that we want for Canterbury, and then in the natural environment and land use chapters, that's how we deliver to those outcomes. Spatial planning will be mandatory under the new system, so every region will have a spatial plan, and it will need to be developed by collectively by the local authorities. And again, it supports it. The spatial plan is there to support outcomes being delivered through both that natural environment chapter and through the land use planning chapters.
Okay, John. Oh, sorry, Ian.
Sorry to interrupt, but I was just wondering if Christchurch becomes unitary, are they part of this spatial plan, or are they have their own spatial plan?
So it'll be every regional council. So if there's unitary authority, if say Canterbury was to split into different unitary authorities, and each of those unitary authorities would need a spatial plan. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said regional council. Every region. So if the regions get split into smaller regions, then it would be those regions.
John.
Just in regard to the national direction, we're sitting at the top, and I'm reflecting on our wānanga this morning. If we had indications of where that national direction was going to go, I think the conversation this morning would have been in a completely different direction. So are you getting any sense of when some of these directions will come?
Everything I've seen suggests sort of around mid this year, but then there's also sort of scuttlebutt that suggests it might be a little bit later. But I think at the moment we're hearing it all land around the same time as the bills.
Megan.
So just so I'm clear on the national direction, there's already NPS that's just were refreshed and came out just before Christmas. Those ones that came out in December, are they being refreshed and renewed as well, or are they set?
I suspect they'll all be refreshed because they'll be going into a sort of a single set of direction. But yeah, I couldn't tell you a definitive answer on that, but Patrick might know more.
Yeah, our understanding was government's intention was that those set the direction that would be fed into that new system. So the work that was done last year wouldn't be wasted. It would be kind of transitioned into the new system. But of course, the legislation's different. Where national direction compared to national instruments in the new system is slightly different. So we're expecting them to provide the direction into the new system, but it won't be a direct lift and shift because the legislation that underpins and enables those pieces of secondary legislation are slightly different. But basically the same is what I would interpret them as being.
Our CEO would like to make a...
Thank you, through you, Chair. Just a reminder to councillors, the national direction, those tools, one of the criticisms has been that they are not aligned and very often make an even more complex beast of the current Resource Management Act. So the intention of this is to streamline and to be very focused, and there'll be tranches of release. We do have some visibility of that, Councillor. It is dynamic at the moment, and as soon as we have some further clarity, we would certainly put that in front of you.
Peter.
So my question is about, I guess, the architecture for national direction for these planning instruments. Are they going to be generic across the country? Or how does that work? Is it just one size fits all?
I think the content. So there's some minimum sort of requirements, some mandatory matters that all spatial plans will have to cover. So that will be generic across the country, and there will be sort of how they're pulled together and what they look like will also be generic across the country. So, and sort of particularly the land use chapters, the rules will also be fairly generic across the country, unless there's a really good reason to move away from that. So it'll be the same sort of zoning throughout the country as well.
Councillor Scott.
Yeah, Chair, just to follow up on that. So we know the complexity that we have across this region in terms of things that, when we did our land and water plan and the first regional policy statement, it was hard to cater for everything. It's hard to cater for upland, our drier environments. So it was harder to cater for the likes of the environments down in the Mackenzie and the Waitaki and places like that. And then again, when you're going north, the environments are different again. So the spatial planning piece of this and the land chapters are going to be quite complex in terms of being able how to do that. And my concern about this, and I hope your second opinion about when this might happen is right, not the first one, is that how much time are we spending? And you're the transition man now, Patrick, so this could be all in your court, big fella. How much time are we making available to be able to do that for those people that are going to judge that? Because I know there's a deep lack of understanding when you go to TAs. Say no, I don't want to answer that if you like, but I mean, that's my concern is that.
We'll be given time frames that we need to have this stuff prepared by, and at the moment the time frames look really scarily tight. So I think we've got about 15 months following the royal assent of the Act. We've got to prepare and notify the spatial plan. So that's, I mean, the speed that planning moves at, it's pretty breakneck for planning, and particularly when we're trying to pull all of the stuff into a plan. So yeah, really tight time frames at the moment.
Just a comment to you, Chair. We're gonna miss stuff in a short time frame.
Councillor Mackenzie.
So just going back to my first question, and a follow-on question from that is, if the regional spatial plan applies to, if the Canterbury region gets split up and that's local government reform, but we've already had to do a regional spatial plan, how does that apply to the different unitaries or whatever the split up looks like if the regional spatial plan is done before you've done the local government reorganisation, but the local government organisation, let's say for sake of argument, splits out Christchurch and leaves a rural regional council, do you then, how does the spatial plan then have teeth over effectively what will be two councils?
I suspect they would need to go back and make the decisions again, but I guess the information that they're making the decisions from is probably not going to change too much, just based on the boundary of where it's, so their work can kind of go on without because it'll be work to inform any decision maker and who the decision.
So I guess a follow-on question from that is that I understand that you're reacting to the instructions coming down from, the ether, but shouldn't we be suggesting to government that you need to do one and then before you do the other? Do the local government reform and sort out what that's likely to look like before we start doing spatial plans, which could be out of date before the ink is dry on.
Stephanie.
Thank you, through you, Chair. It is a bit chicken and egg, Councillor Mackenzie. I think the approach that has been used is that the resource management bills that are in Select Committee will become pieces of legislation prior to a piece of legislation with regard to any amalgamation or otherwise of local government. At the moment, that is a proposal, and we are waiting for central government to determine whether that proposal turns into something else. There's no doubt that parts of the country are talking about their own amalgamation or how they work closely together. It is very clear from Minister Bishop that the regional spatial plans are not only mandatory but must be delivered in that 15-month period. That has been central government's number one priority. And also, if you look within the legislation, what you will see is that it is a 10-year spatial plan, but it can be called back by the minister or others if there are significant changes. And that might be something that is considered. But certainly it's the RM changes, the resource management changes, that have been deemed the priority for central government.
Councillor Mackay, then Councillor Faulkner.
So in the spirit of what the chair said at the beginning, which is to enable discussion and opinion, I don't have a question, I have an opinion. So I'm just going to share that. So the way that I see these two system changes coming together or pulling apart is that when it comes to the local government, streamlining local government, we've done our submission, we've told central government what we think our position is, and from my part, that's now done. Like that's a little bit in the background. And I see that sitting here as a regional councillor, my job will be to do a regional spatial plan within 15 months. If the proposal goes forward and if we are going to have a CTB, regardless of who's on the CTB or not, they will then have up to 2 years to come up with a regional reorganisational plan. And that time frame, let's even say it kicked off, let's say we got that decision in 1 week's time, that's still out of sync because we just need to focus on doing the regional plan. If there's new regions in 2, 3, 6 years' time, then that's another group of decision makers because my role is actually just to make the decision on this regional plan right now. So that's my opinion of how they actually come together. I'm saying I'm ignoring it.
Councillor Faulkner.
No, I support Councillor Scott and Megan Mackay in turning the attention to the spatial planning process. But my question is mainly for you, Stephanie, that in reflecting on the Uranuwaya Rivers Regional Plan, and we were under intense pressure to get that completed within the time frame, and we did it, but it was an enormous workload. And my question is, can we do it? How focused do we need to be?
Through you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Faulkner. As Lisa said, these are eye-watering timeframes. They are particularly so when you think that every region in the country has to do this. My own bet is that ultimately they may need to be phased because of the realities that play out. In terms of Waitaha, Canterbury, and this council and the regional council, we are well prepared. I am certain we have the talent for this, and I'm certain we've been doing the science work, and of course we have plans that back us up already. I think what you might see, Councillor, is that we utilize that, and then the subsequent iteration would be a further piece along the way. But I am confident we have the talent and the resources, but we will have to be laser focused or it will not happen.
Chair Swiggs.
No, it's actually just been covered, but we did, all the submissions that we've done on RM reform have talked about the time frame and how the time frame doesn't necessarily work. So yes, we have been advocating to the government to make a call on the timeframes, but whatever that falls out, we're just going to have to work with it. And it sounds like the focus is definitely RM implementation, which means that there will be a regional spatial plan, which will be this region as it sits at the moment.
I'd just like to add, as the discussion has just showed us, there are a lot of things in flux right now. But it's really important that even though there are some key things that we don't know, that we actually just have to start, because this process, as Lisa and Stephanie have identified, and some of you have reiterated, is really short. So there will be some things that we just need to start now. We are working across the region with our colleagues to make sure that we're all talking, starting, beginning to plan. And if there are decisions that come up a bit later, then at least that a lot of the preparation has been done. And I would say, in terms of there is currently a spatial plan for the Greater Christchurch Partnership, which is currently in place. So that part has been completed or will be added on to as a really sound basis. And that's another reason why, for Stephanie's confidence, because we have shown across the GCP that we can stand up alongside our colleagues and get a spatial plan in place.
Councillor McKenzie.
Thank you, Nettles. So what you just said is if we have a regional spatial plan, the GCP plan which sits inside that could just be split out if Christchurch becomes a unitary, or something similar, which wouldn't necessarily mean a complete revolution, is what I took from what you just said.
I don't think that the Greater Christchurch spatial plan can be just taken and put straight into the new spatial plan. It's not going to meet the tests that will come through the new system, but it's a great basis for that work. So I guess the grunt work has been done there with the Greater Christchurch spatial plan for that part of it, but there'll need to be some additional work to kind of get it nestled into a more regulatory framework, which Amanda will cover that a bit later on as well.
Councillor Robinson, then Councillor Davies.
No, thanks for this. Just with regards to the time frame and the perhaps need to sort of phase it, as the CE said, do we have priorities or areas in which we would do that going forward that we need to tackle first and phase? Okay.
So just to be clear, when I said phase, I meant phase it across the country as opposed to phase it within the region.
A couple of questions. Would you think that often with complex situations with, climate change and planning and that, they use these scenarios, sort of scenario planning? You don't have to answer this, just I wonder if we should start looking at that. The other question is it a time that we as councillors should start thinking about what works in our regional plan, what doesn't work in our regional plan, and then do those plan changes that went to fix the regional plan, what happens to them? Is that something that we need to have another discussion about?
Yes, 100%. Yeah. And we've got a bit further down. We'd start talking about the work that is underway already, and that kind of sort of identifying scenarios that we will test going forward. And then I guess in terms of like the maintenance of our current plans, I think that's a really good question, and something that we're going to have to be really live to if we get a decision back from government on Plan Change 8. So, yeah.
Okay, we can probably move forward.
Great. And I think I'm actually just going to skip over the next slide because it's just reiterating what I've just said, which is one plan, three parts, but it needs to work together. I'm going to pass over to Amanda.
Oh, sorry.
Whatever my name is.
Councillor Campbell.
So just because you're going to skip over it, because I do have a little note on this, I'm still not 100% clear who or what is setting environmental limits. Are these being imposed on us, or are we playing a part in setting them?
A lot will be handed to us through the national direction. We're not really clear on exactly what that's going to look like yet, but then we'll also have an opportunity, if we've got the right kind of evidence in place, to be able to set our own ones as well. And I think for a lot of for Canterbury, we're fortunate in that we've already got a lot of environmental limits set. But that it might be that we get handed new methodologies that we've got to apply to the setting of those limits. It's probably worth saying as well that the bills are really clear as well that we will be setting environmental ecosystem limits, and human health limits will be set by central government.
Okay, moving forward.
Kia ora. So I think you have all seen this slide before, but it's just a good breakdown of where we're at and where the options are for decisions to be made. So the draft bill sets a tight statutory framework for regional spatial planning. It sets out mandatory matters and roles and timeframes, and as we know, those are tight. It makes it clear that the local authorities are going to need to work together to develop the spatial plan, but that individually the councils are going to need to decide to notify that and to accept the decisions of the hearing panel. The Spatial Plan Committee will have a central role in shaping the spatial plan, but there is still flexibility for councils to decide how they work together, which includes the governance, membership, terms of reference and resourcing. The timeframes are ambitious, so early agreement on the structure and ways of working is going to be important. And just noting the Minister retains intervention powers if required, if the functions are not being carried out by that Spatial Planning Committee or the councils. The slide is just a summary of some of the things this council has already submitted on in terms of the reform. So one of the key things we obviously agreed to submit on was around the representation of elected members, clear representation for mana whenua, better alignment between decision-making powers and implementation responsibilities, getting the councils who are going to need to adopt the plan at the end to be connected in with the development of the draft plan throughout the process, and be supported by regional leadership and having the regional council play a part in determining the chair.
We might just stop there for a second, Councillor Campbell.
You're into the slides on which I have questions now. If we can just back up a bit to the regional spatial plan requirements. In that top left-hand lob, I'm confused a wee bit about the local authorities individually decide whether to notify a draft spatial plan for public consultation. The way I'm reading that, it could be that, for example, Ashburton District Council decides to notify, but Christchurch City Council decides not to, and Timaru does. And am I reading that correctly? And if so, how is that going to work?
You are reading that correctly, and that will be a challenge. I imagine that the Minister would step in at that stage when the councils have all agreed to a process to follow. They've all had representation on the committee that developed the plan, and they've all had staff participate through that process and been informed throughout. It will be difficult to then not adopt that at the end of the process.
So on to the next one, in which I have a similar question. Down in the bottom left hand, requires decisions on the draft spatial plan chapter to be endorsed by local authorities prior to consultation. Again, what if a rogue local authority or two throws their toys out of the cot and says, actually we were forced into this, we don't agree with it, we don't endorse it, or they face a ratepayer rebellion of ratepayers saying we're not going to agree to this. I mean, all of this is possible.
I think, was that on the next slide over? Yeah, so that was our submission, and I suppose that does come with its risks in terms of having that. I think the reason that we are making that submission is because it's going to be really key to bring all of the councils along on the journey as the plan's being developed, to avoid the things that you've just mentioned, just so that all of that disagreement can be worked through during the process and not be left to the end of it where there's that could be a bit of a disaster.
I guess I'm just concerned about, the people in the room might all agree, but then the ratepayers of whatever council say, well, we're not on board with this, which is a distinct possibility, I think. And then the political pressure is applied to those elected representatives to represent the views of their constituents. So, I don't know.
Councillor Mackay.
So my question might not be for staff. It might actually be for Dion, because it's what I've heard you say, and it's resonating now as we're going through this. As I understand it, the spatial planning committee itself has to be appointed by local authorities who must reach consensus on who they appoint. But the minister has power of appointment. And I think, Dion, you've talked about, I think in our submission, that we were seeking to have one power of appointment as well, and that was for the chairperson role. Was our submission more than that, or more than just one person, or do we just want to have one power of appointment?
And also the mana whenua, which is not descriptive in the legislation or in the bills as they're written at the moment. So yes, it was. We were just, because at the moment the way they're written is there is no space for regional councils to have a say in the regional spatial planning committees, which I think is an oversight. Yeah. So what we're saying is that we want one, probably the chair, because we've got that regional view, and also making sure that we have mana whenua representation at that point, because that is one of the only points that they'll have that, and otherwise there will be issues potentially down the track.
And I would just add to that. So that's what's outlined there. And I think the point that you were raising, Councillor Campbell, is the exact reason why there's that upfront focus on setting the joint committee, and why that is incredibly important, and the work that the Mayoral Forum is doing. And I think when you were talking before about the work we need to do in the spatial plan space, setting that joint committee is the most important thing at this point, because that's where it all can and can't go wrong, and where it all can and can't fall over. The importance of having a joint committee that works and provides those links into each of the regions and each of the TAs, so there isn't an unexpected decision that's made further down the line, and each of those local authorities, regional council or TAs, trust that where that joint committee is going with the spatial plan, that's going to be really key to make sure that there aren't any surprises or fish hooks at the end. So the importance of that joint committee. I will also note that in your submission, you called out the openness in terms of the process of setting that joint committee. Currently, the legislation just says local authorities have to work together to decide a joint committee. You called for a lot more specificity around the process of what that looks like, because work together opens, that's a Pandora's box of all kinds of things, and it can be very hard to work together in an open playing field when you've got a 15-month time frame that's ticking down. It could take 15 months to decide a joint committee. You don't got long to create a spatial plan at that point. So in your submission, you requested a lot more specificity and structure around the formation of that joint committee, which the hope would be to avoid some of those last-minute snags that you mentioned there.
Do you have a supplementary?
I have just one follow-up question, and it comes down to, so yes, it's good to hear that we asked to have the power to appoint and include mana whenua. The part that I guess this is more of again an opinion rather than a question, and that is, we all agreed that front-loading engagement is good, provided the right people are at the table to make those decisions. And what I'm finding challenging is to sit here and go, well, yes, we agreed with that. We supported the government's shift in this respect. But from a Ngāi Tahu appointed councillor here, one of the reasons why we supported that is because we're told that Māori will have more voice in the upstream, And the very first decision that is to be made, which is appointing the joint committee, there's no role for Māori whatsoever. So it's really challenging to actually go, we support that when it's not real. Yeah.
Councillor Scott, then Councillor Faulkner.
And am I correct in assuming, should never assume, should you, Andrew, that we consider that the members of these committees and the appointments, like for the regional council chairperson role, if we get that opportunity, that these people will be councillors, or can they be suitably qualified individuals that sit outside a councillor role?
The bill at the moment requires a Local Government Act process to be gone through. So there is a requirement for an elected member, but there's no clarity or specificity about who else would be on that committee. So at this stage, we don't have clarity.
Councillor Faulkner.
Oh, sorry, just to add to that. And I think on one hand, we don't have clarity, but on the other hand, that equally means there are more options that we could go down as a region in that space. So that's exactly the thinking the Mayoral.
Yeah, sorry, Patrick, I took you. I guess my observation there is that a group of councils could appoint somebody who is not a councillor to that, who has the skills that they require to represent them.
Councillor Faulkner.
Just looking at the previous slide, and it looks like, to me, it looks like a very polished zone committee basis, with a lot of the flaws taken out of it and the problems that were associated there. And I'm just trying to get my head around to get some comfort. At the moment, I don't have much comfort about how the makeup of the committee is going to be structured. And in regards to Councillor Mackay, Maori engagement, my question is, how do we get more information on that? How do we secure mana whenua engagement in that process? Because that was a key foundational part of the zone committee process, and its success, I think it failed for other reasons.
I think as well as the submission you've provided, you've got a range of options there. You're politicians, and you have your connections with stakeholders and with people who are decision makers in this space. So continue doing that work and making sure your position as a council is well known. The submission is, of course, one valid thing, but every single conversation you have as a group can continue to reinforce the messages that send those through. You've got another option as well, or your other pathway is through Chair Swiggs' conversations in the Canterbury Mayoral Forum, where the decisions are and the conversations are happening in that forum as well. So providing that Chair Swiggs is a really useful channel to be able for you as a council to be able to put those points forward.
I'd also add that, as Stephanie's already noted, this work is under active consideration right now in terms of the governance and how these boards are going to be set up versus the decision making on who is on them. So absolutely total what Patrick has just said. Another key person though in this process is Stephanie, who is advocating really strongly amongst the CEs and also providing a lot of advice and support on how these things, just even on the basics of how these things are developed. So there's I wouldn't say a full court press, but there are multiple avenues. There's a braided river in terms of how this approach. So it's not just one, but all of those avenues are open to you.
I'm just going to go to Chair Swiggs briefly.
Something that my colleague next to me just said was more information. Can we get more information? I can assure you that there is no more information coming out of the Mayoral Forum at the moment. This council is, I can't speak for all councils in the region, but I can say that this council is probably well ahead of the thinking in this space, because we're holding a more regional focus, and these are regional spatial plans. So I think this council's in a having more in-depth, quite in-depth conversations. I know other councils are having them as well, but I just can say that there is no more information out there than what we are getting here at this point in time.
Okay, we'll continue.
Great. So the next slide is around the forming of the Spatial Planning Committee. And so we've covered a lot of this already, but I'll quickly go over it. So the local authorities need to work together to decide the composition and terms of reference for the committee. The Mayoral Forum has been the forum used currently to have some of those conversations, and just noting the GCP are also having some of those conversations as well. The chief executives have been asked to provide advice to the Mayoral Forum on potential options for the committee operating models and membership. And the CEs are considering those options and including considering models from other regions and models from previous regional work. So the CWMS approach is being considered as part of that, as well as the Greater Christchurch Spatial Plan way of working. And there was an initial discussion at the Mayoral Forum earlier this year, and then there will be a follow-up meeting in May to discuss the further advice from the chief executives, I imagine.
Okay, I'd just like to go to Chair Swiggs to comment on this, and then maybe Stephanie, and then I've got a question for colleagues to discuss.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think we actually covered this before when the question was asked. So there's probably not a lot more that I could add from perspective of the Regional Spatial Planning Committee. The piece that is going to be quite interesting if it stays the way that it is currently drafted within the bills, the consensus piece, works reasonably well from what I'm seeing in smaller regions. Where we have bigger regions like this and some other bigger regions across the country, that will be quite challenging because there are very disparate views on what is needed by different communities in their spaces. So different communities have different needs at different times and are at different areas, different continuums on the spectrum of where they see spatial planning. But Stephanie, if there's anything that you have potentially about where the CEO's workers coming into the spatial planning committee or the spatial planning place, it would be quite useful. The Mayoral Forum has stood up through our CEO forum. Well, I don't know if it stood up is the right word, but we've asked the CEO Forum to lead this piece of work, to give that information back to the Mayoral Forum so that we can then take that back to our respective councils and have these conversations. But I don't know exactly where that's at, so if you can shed some piece of light on that, would be quite useful.
Through you, Chair. Thank you, Chair Swiggs. I guess there's just a couple of things that I would add. It is a very dynamic space. And I will note that this is quite challenging for the chief executives of the 11 councils that make up the Canterbury Mayoral Forum, partly because the Canterbury Mayoral Forum doesn't technically have decision-making rights. It is, I won't call it advisory, but it's certainly strongly advocacy, and it brings together the region as a whole. But the decisions need to be made by each independent individual council across the region. But CEs have been asked to pull together, and obviously the chief executives don't do this by themselves. They have extraordinarily talented people who are already working on this, to show what the options might be for a joint committee so that those mayors and chair can consider that. And that is what we're working through. The most recent conversation we had, and Amanda led this, thank you, is the education, if you like, the uplifting of understanding around the table of all 11 chief executives of what our responsibilities are in light of what is currently sitting in select committee, noting that could change when it comes out of select committee. Alongside that has also been a recognition of the significance of the Takiwa of Canterbury, but also of Ngaitahu for much of the South Island. Because, of course, regions need to work together, and there is an overlay. So, for instance, councillors, the significance of the Waitaki in that it is split across regions, but it is also split north and south, none of which enhances the mana of the tonga of the Waitaki, let alone working through a regional spatial plan. So where the Cs are at the moment is to recognize that each council will have its relationship with mana whenua, the importance of that, trying to bring an education process, and then our next hui will actually be a wānanga in which we look at these options, and then to bring something to the Canterbury Mayoral Forum where the mayors and the chair will discuss what they think those options are. But every council will need to take that and have a discussion. Now, as Patrick said, this is an extraordinary challenge in Canterbury and Waitaha, because there are 11 councils, and those politics are very different because the constituencies are different, because the issues at stake are different, because rural and urban is different, because of the location of the waterways and what their problems are is different. This is going to be a challenge for Waitaha. So when I was asked before, do I have confidence? I have confidence that we can do a regional spatial plan. Do I have confidence we can get a joint committee up and running? That very much depends upon my elected members in this room and in 10 other rooms across Waitaha. And so your role in advocating and your role in finding collaboration is actually fundamental. Nothing will be delivered in 15 months' time if we don't have a joint committee. My last comment, sorry, Chair, is that we also, as chief executives, as a subset, through the Greater Christchurch Partnership, have a resolution in which we also must deliver some advice to the GCP on its future workings, including what its role may or may not be in a transition plan with regard to spatial planning. This is taking up considerable time, but it is time, if we do it well at the front end, we might get a better outcome as we go. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Stephanie. 2 words I heard there, fundamental and important. So, colleagues, I will be posing the first of a number of questions, and if possible, I'd like to hear from all colleagues, because this is so fundamentally important to the next stage of the journey. The first thing, what sort of committee structure would best help Canterbury make regional decisions while still making sure districts are heard and mana whenua are genuine partners? Councillor Mackay.
I'll share another opinion. That was really helpful to hear the work that's going in to know that a decision will come back to us about what the options are for how we have a joint committee. Because what I think is most important is that we do have a true regional scale look and not just a collective of district positions. And I've come from a district council where we're looking just at the district itself, and we're thinking about what infrastructure is needed where and transport routes. But this is going to require us to lift up and have a real broader collective regional approach. What I'm finding really challenging with that is how do we achieve it in a political climate at the moment where we're being undermined by, because of the streamlining local government. When I'm out talking to my colleagues in other councils, and they're saying, well, hold on one moment, we're going to be regional council soon, or we are going to be the thing, or we're going to have a unitary, and so we might as well just pick up and do this work. What's really challenging about that is they've failed to look through the timeline to go, actually, this is just a proposal. Cabinet needs to come back, needs to actually put a bill and make it some law about whether or not there'll be a CTB. And then there needs to be a process with community engagement about what regional reorganisation looks like. Then they have to implement it and go through their own process of appointing, of electing people to be part of it. That is not going to happen quickly. And so it's really challenging to go, if a number of our colleagues around other councils have already leapt to that outcome right now, then it's going to be difficult for us to say, we still hold regional voice and we hold regional perspective, and that's what we want to bring to the conversation of a spatial plan. So for me, it is really securing regional lens and Māori participation right at the very beginning, but as decision makers and not advisors. So support ECAN's position on saying that. And I would like to see the makeup of that be not necessarily all elected officials. So, and I'm not saying that elected officials only think short time because of political pressures, but our current democratic system actually does create that pressure. And if we're looking at a 30-year plan, then we need really long-term intergenerational thinkers. So not necessarily all elected officials. That's what type of structure I think would build the best success.
Thank you, Councillor Mackay. Councillor Scott.
I think we're at very big risk of rushing into spatial planning committees without consideration of what they may look like. We've started a conversation down our way about, hey, we need to have some conversations with the people in the region that want to have some conversations. I think the thing that this, and thank you, Megan, for your input on that. I think it's been really valuable. The glue in this is us. The glue in how we put this together are your regional councillors, because they sit in a space that TAs don't sit in, and so they can have that conversation with TAs. We're getting a wee bit of pushback through Nick. I'm getting a bit of pushback, but saying, why do you people keep interfering in this and getting in our face? You know, this is going to be our thing, but they don't know the next step. So my thing about this is that we probably somehow, and I'm not committing to how we do this, is we need to have a conversation so we can socialise some of the stuff that we're talking about here today with those people who, at this point in time, consider that they're going to make all decisions. And, you know, we've already talked about how complex this is, and we're the ones that understand how complex it is. Mackenzie District Council doesn't really understand what's going on at Kaikoura. But I think we've got views in this room that do join those things together. And Stephanie made the point about the Waitaki. I think the biggest hurdle we have to jump for the region and how we go forward is the Waitaki. And I had conversations with their councillors down there. And although they see their future with water services in the south because of the service around that too, coming out of Dunedin, so it's just like having a service centre, they're very confused about what they want to do on their boundaries that come down the true left-hand side of the lake, Ohau. And so they've got a bit of it, but they don't know what to do with it. I talked to David Perenara O'Connell last week saying, look, we've got some stuff going on with Te Mokahi, which was supposed to join all that stuff together. What did you say to me, David? Do you think that's flown apart, where it's not going anywhere, it's going to be difficult? So we've got that as a bit of history there. So I think there's a lot of chat needs to happen, Chair, before we actually say, oh, we're going to get this one from Timaru and this one from Kaikoura and, you know, 3 people from Christchurch. So that's my opinion on that.
Chair Swiggs.
What was I? I've actually forgotten what I was going to say. I'm sorry.
Councillor Ward.
My fellow councillor's stolen all my thunder. I guess when you sit in a car trying to save fuel, drive to Christchurch for 2 hours, you just talk about a lot of stuff. But I tend to think maybe we need to, like Peter's alluded to, we need to be starting at the finish rather than at the start. So I do have problems sitting here developing a spatial plan for all of Canterbury when we don't know what Canterbury is going to look like. And I do agree with the fact that, you know, it's not necessarily councillors and TAs, people that you need around the table having discussion. There's a lot of expertise out in our communities, both urban and rural, who have got a lot to offer us. And so, I mean, we don't want to fall into having a talk fest for the next 15 months and not actually achieving anything. So, and, you know, I mean, a lot of you know in this room that South Canterbury's, you know, has been touring for quite a while, and we are keen to get on the bus, if there's any fuel in the bus, to get the show on the road. Oh, it's an electric bus, okay. Well, there's plenty of power in the lake. No charging stations. So I guess that's where we're sitting currently. So I mean, to be honest, I feel quite confused because where are we meant to start?
Councillor Campbell, then Cheswigs.
I think the one word for this is messy. I agree that there's expertise needed in the room, but also our society, our country is built on democracy. And if you don't have people who believe that particularly they are represented in that room, then they're not going to buy into it. And the further away from them you take the decision making, the less they will accept it. So what does it look like? Heaven knows. But if you don't get it right, it'll be happening all over again in 20 years when this hasn't worked because people don't agree with it and don't go along with it.
Thank you, Cheswigs.
I just want to be very clear, and it's and sorry, we're having a discussion, but we will be legislated to do a spatial plan by the middle of next year. We do not have the opportunity to say, oh, we don't want to do that, or we shouldn't be part of that. The way that the bill is written right now, we aren't even part of it anyway. This is at the moment squarely in the hands of the TAs. The TAs must come together by consensus to have a spatial planning committee and then build a spatial plan by, September of next year. That is going to be the law of the land. We do not have an opportunity to necessarily change that. Potentially it might, the timeframes, because everybody's saying timeframes aren't working and aren't aligned, so we need to see what's going to come out from the select committee. But we do not have the opportunity, even the simplification for local government proposal put spatial planning and getting the RMA stuff done first, and then the simplification was going to be kicked off in 2 years' time after that was become a potential act of parliament. We don't know where that process is at right now. We need to be focusing on where we can advocate, and we need to be making sure that we're advocating to our TAs as councillors. I don't know what South Canterbury might want to do, but as councillors we need to be advocating that if we want, we need to be talking to our TAs and saying there is value in having regional thinking at your spatial planning committee, and if you want, and I think everybody in this room probably does, the mana whenua piece as well. We need to be talking to our councillors in our region as well as the mayors, because they need to be making these decisions at their council tables if the bills turn into enact the way they are right now. But we don't have like what's Peter and Nick had said. That would be great in an ideal world, but we're going to have law enacted very shortly, and we don't have that. That's not going to be the way it works.
Thank you. Councillor Gerard. I'm really excited about this regional spatial plan. I just think and I think I agree with Stephanie. I think I totally think that Environment Canterbury has got the resources and the skills to do it, and I'm sure the TAs can bring forward some staff as well. So I've done spatial planning of for over 30 years and doing the staging and that sort of thing. There are people that can do this work, so don't worry about that. And there will be and scale is not a problem. Once you got your head around, I've worked on projects where there's 3 counties in Britain. Was my project. So scale's not a problem, skills are not a problem. It's just, getting people around the table. And I recommend perhaps we could start as a council working on our catchments, dividing our region into catchments and doing integrated catchment management plans, so that we're working through the constraints, the zones, and getting those in our head now, and so that when we come in to feed our work into the spatial plan along with the TAs, we've got all those constraints in line with on a map. So, we could be doing a whole lot of work now, and already there's been work done by other companies like EOS has done quite a bit of work already, and there'll be lots of work we could pull together to do this quickly. So it's bringing all that data together, making the most of everything we've got, and pulling into some plans. So it's really, we've got the staff, and we've got the support services here to help us, and your team, Patrick. So, and I'm just thinking, once we got all those plans together, that will feed into spatial plans and our annual plans and long-term planning. And got a little diagram.
You always have one.
I'm confident we can do it.
Thank you. Deputy Cranwell.
Kia ora, Sarah. Just you're our resident spatial plan expert now. We had one last term. Now we've got another one, which is awesome. So we've been talking about the spatial planning committee, and then kind of, if there's regional councils on it, if there's TA councils not on it, but they don't have expertise as spatial planners or spatial planning knowledge, do you think on a spatial plan committee that you need expert on spatial planning?
Yes.
So therefore, if a model committee going forward, you'd see a committee with like a mixed model kind of thing, like yep.
Yes, I think there should be a planner on the committee as well, just somebody who's got that overall understanding of where they're going. I do think there does need to be some technical people with technical experience on the committee. Yeah.
Kia ora, kapai.
Thank you, Councillor Robinson. Yeah, and going forward, I think we do need some sort of like technical working group type setup, with experts, as well as elected members, mana whenua, health, Department of Conservation, and some of these key partners in it, in order to get the process and the development right. As Megan said, we need to put this heavy at one point and then let it go, let it flow. But we just also got to be mindful of not to be the lawyers, the jury, and then be the judge, because that is not how we do it. We need to be get to the point we can be slightly hands off and let the community input as well. And I think that's really important. But as I say, we've been legislated for in the past and told to do things, quite rightly so. It's not new to us. We shouldn't be afraid of it. Time constraints, but I'm sure we've got a lot of things that we've already developed in the past, like the RPS. My only concern going forward is the lack of coastal input. And I know it's a spatial plan, it does include that, but it is very easy for it to slip off the radar if we're, at that level. And we need that type of expert in the room as well. Coastal, spatial type thing. Yeah. Thank you, Councillor Robinson. Councillor Faulkner.
I just wonder whether we're drifting off what we're here for a little bit. But I look at what the bottom line there, the mayoral forum and setting the committee. We haven't really got enough information to be talking about committee in my mind, because we don't know what the TA mayors and the mayoral forum are deciding. Our next meeting is in May. It looks like the national direction information is coming in May, so we'll have more information then. Are we sort of getting ahead of ourselves a little bit and talking about committee makeup instead of just focusing on spatial planning process itself?
Staff.
what Lisa will add to this, where in terms of the conversations around the makeup of the committee, other formal governance, there's a lot of work that actually we need to do, because we've got the planners, and there was a planning managers, there was a forum, there's a policy managers forum. There are a bunch of various stops along the way to support the CEs and to support the Mural Forum, and we are alongside our colleagues, we're involved in all of those things, but particularly in the Planning Managers Forum, we do a lot of the support on the work on behalf of that group, because we have the expertise and the skill set and the resource. So, in terms of decision making in this forum, we probably are getting ahead of ourselves, but it won't just be. There will be a decision handed down. However, it's very useful for us to hear your views, the chair to hear your views, for Stephanie to hear your views, and for you all to feel like you know where we're at the moment. As I've probably said now a couple times today, there are a lot of things moving, and there's a lot of things we don't know. We do need to start work in a no regrets approach, and we need to make a start and get moving. And we also need to keep you abreast of the issues and the work, so you don't think there's nothing happen. We're not doing anything. And you also don't get a surprise to say, well, this is the first I've heard of it. Where did this come from? So we're walking a difficult line, and please call us if we're not, if we're making missteps along the way. It's actually really tricky to update you, but to not actually have all of the facts, and that's not my preference. But that's what we've got. So, did you want to add anything?
It probably is with just kind of calling out as well. The committee is one kind of structure that needs to be put in place. There's sitting below the committee. There's also a requirement to have a secretariat that to help support that committee, and then there's other kind of options then for how that committee is supported, and that's work that Amanda in particular has been sort of leading, looking at what those options are, to inform the chief executives in the first instance, and there's been quite a lot of discussion as well amongst sort of planning managers, and then we're also kind of looking at our own work programs as well, and going, what is the thing, because we know that we've got to bring all of Canterbury along, and all the Canterbury planning managers along, and all of the CEs along, and eventually a secretariat as well. And I think, absolutely being on Genevieve, Councillor Robinson, we, technical working groups as well in amongst that. But yeah, we're trying to, do our work, because we can be out there talking to people as well and influencing, but we're also not in charge of it. We're also, all we can do is kind of influence along the way, and that's what we're trying to do. But really what we're trying to do at the moment is really influence by doing, and by demonstrating that we're doing work, and that's what we're how we're sort of working with the planning managers at the moment, is by sort of demonstrating the work that we're doing to get ourselves ready, in the hope that they can kind of come along and maybe leverage off that work.
I would say, and within that comment, this is what we know right now. We haven't been told to not do what we're doing. We may do. We're here to serve. This is what we know right now. So.
And I'll just clarify one point you made, Councillor Faulkner, about the Canterbury Mural Forum are doing this work, and a decision will come down to you. That won't be how, because as Stephanie mentioned, the Canterbury Mural Forum doesn't have decision-making powers. So what the Mural Forum is doing at this stage is working on what they think unfortunately, Council Chair Swiggs isn't here to clarify this for you, but what they think a model for Canterbury would look like for a joint committee. And as Stephanie mentioned before, that would need to be endorsed by all of the councils in Canterbury. So the decision about what the governance model looks like and what a joint committee structure looks like, that is absolutely something that you can have an opinion on, because that decision will come to you. Once the Mayoral Forum have had that conversation about it, you will, as a council, need to endorse that at a certain point, according to the legislation as we have it now.
That's not what Dion said just before that. He said it was up to the TAs to form the Spatial Planning Committee.
I'm getting your submission and what the legislation actually says at this moment confused in my mind.
So which way is it?
At the moment, the TAs and as the legislation is currently drafted. Thank you for clarifying that. Correct. Yes, thank you. Thank you for clarifying that.
And one moment. We've got a few questions. We've got Councillor Mackay, Sunkel, Moody, Scott, and then Mackenzie, and then we'll move on. Thank you.
Look, I'm fairly relaxed when it comes to creating the spatial plan committee, and yes, we do have to have consensus, but there's also some dispute resolution processes if consensus can't be met. And even then, if the dispute resolution processes don't resolve the matter, then the minister gets to appoint a decision maker. So ultimately, there's lots of gates there. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that the main job of the committee is to come up with a draft spatial plan. Then it goes over to an independent hearings panel that ultimately will run the public process for the hearing, come up with a recommendation, send that recommendation to the minister, and then the minister will ultimately decide. And if that's the process, then the reason I'm saying I'm fairly relaxed about the spatial planning committee is it goes through another process. However, if the RMA is going to continue to run in the same way as it currently does with those independent hearing panels, the information that is put in is absolutely critical and valuable, because you only have scope to change anything based on the submissions that are in front of you. You don't have open scope to change very much at all. I know we don't know what the future RMA is, but assuming that that's the case, then it's critical to get the settings right in the spatial planning committee itself.
Yeah, I mean, it's, again, we don't really know exactly what the legislation is going to say, but I anticipate that they'd want to keep some of those same kind of principles around how those hearings should run alive, because pretty important for the integrity of the whole system. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Sunkel.
Thank you. A comment just in listening to the conversation. I guess in my mind I see two parallel processes. That committee that will be the decision maker. But I think, and I'm kind of relaxed as Councillor Mackay is as to what it looks like. We all agree what we think it might want to be, but ultimately you're not the decision maker as to what it will be. So yes, we can have that conversation. I think for me the critical part is that foundational work that you guys are doing that will then inform the committee, which will then inform the process and the decision making. And if we have that truncated timeline, then in my mind, you, as in we, need to have as much of that information sitting there as the resource, the background, that the committee, when it is put in place, that we can feed into. Others will be feeding as well. So for me, I think it's critical that you do continue that work, provide the groundwork, and then whoever is the decision maker then has that bulk of work to then begin the conversation and understanding. I think it just simplifies it. Given that we don't know what's happening, it's on you guys to pull as much together as you can. I think it's quite simple in my simple mind.
Thank you, Councillor Moody.
Oh, thank you, Chair. So I understand that this is a workshop, right? So our format's a bit different, and part of the process, purpose of it is for councillors to learn each other's, opinions and explore them together. We're not just receiving info from staff. That's just a starter to get us talking. sharing my thinking. I mean, where I'm at, I guess I'm a bit of a late adopter, and generally I'm quite conservative. I don't always, I'm not one to adopt new things in a hurry. I'm pretty cautious in that, and so I'm still going, well, will it even happen? I mean, 50-50, right? Looking at current polling, for the country. So I'm probably not that engaged in this. But in terms of the opportunity to set environmental limits for Canterbury, which is a good opportunity, I'm pretty comfortable with the whole thing outlined in the presentation. There's nothing that's raising my eyebrows. It all looks, good, sensible, unifying stuff. The risks I can see, I guess, if this does roll out, will be the same sort of issues we saw arise through the Canterbury Water Management Strategy, which is quite a similar model of, quite locally based decision making across the region. And we saw that generally, TAs in rural regions will focus on business, over environment because it's a livelihood, and then you've got your urban folks who would perhaps reverse the priorities because going out to the rural is, recreation. And with the proposed makeup, it could be a very business orientated model. And then we risk in the future that gets undone with when we have a change of government, like we saw with Labor's plan, or the last government's plan, to have a very low din of 1 or 2 for Canterbury, and the opposite kind of a vision, really, taking us in a different direction. And so that's the risk I see. If we don't have enough environmental and iwi and urban involvement, we'll end up setting environmental limits that lurch back and forward in our region, which isn't good for business, isn't good for the environment. Was the exact problem that I brought back from the conference that has still slowed us down from making progress.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Moody. Just very quickly from Councillor Scott Mackenzie, and then we must move on.
Scott from the Mackenzie.
So my basic question I have with this, and the chair's made it pretty clear that we have no involvement if this is TAs. If that's true, then we should not fund anything from this point on, because the finances of this organisation are our responsibility. And I don't see why we should be paying for something that we have no governance experience over.
Sorry, I'm just going to jump in. You would have seen us all getting our heads together and going, hang on, that doesn't quite sound right. It's the committee is made up of local authorities, so that does include the regional council. This is not a TA spatial plan. It is a spatial plan with all of the local authorities, including the regional.
Can we back up and explain? Can the chair explain then how we're going to have influence if we're not part of this? Can you?
It's in the forming of this. It's in the forming of the spatial planning committees. So the way the legislation is written, it's in the forming of the spatial planning committees. I'm correct in that, am I?
That local authorities must work together for that. We count as a local authority. The regional council counts as a local authority. So one of the voices that must work together to form the spatial plan committee. I was, you'll note the conversation I had with my learned colleagues to remind me of that just before.
Thank you. Stephanie would just like to make a comment.
This is joyful, isn't it? I think the only comment I would make, and back to you, to Councillor Scott, is that this is exactly the challenge that we're having. We're conflating two different things at the moment. The resource management bills that are in front of the House at the moment are exactly as the staff have said. It includes the regional council. That could be altered through select committee processes if the simplifying local government proposal is heard in a particular way, and then there are amendments to be made to the bills. It could also work the other way, which is there's consternation with regard to the simplifying local government piece of work, and therefore the way the bills are written stand or are strengthened with regard to what a regional council, regional government does. That has yet to play out. That was why your submissions were so fundamental. I will only comment with regard to the politics of this, and that is the conflation of the removal of regional councillors has made it harder at a Canterbury Mayoral Forum and at every Mayoral Forum to have a grounded conversation around the joint committee, because people are getting ahead of themselves with regard to boundaries and who gets what. And therefore, I have been consistent. Until a law changes, I follow the law as it is written. And there is precedent with regard to that. And you heard our audit and risk member some time ago mention that in the context of the former Prime Minister Muldoon. So we stick with the current legislation. There are those two pieces, Councillor Scott, but in terms of the bills, it would include us.
Definitely, and I know that you do follow process. You're very good at that. But my point here is, we cannot have this fundamental confusion and fund something that we don't know what the outcome is. And the point that you make is a very, very good one. That there are two things happening here, but we're being asked to absorb that, and it's really hard as a councillor to absorb that when you've got other people saying, "Oh, this has got nothing to do with the spatial planning committee; it's going to be set up by TAs." So I think somewhere along the line we need to stand on a stump on this and say to the minister, or go and see the goddamn minister. Sorry about that. Excuse me. Go and see the minister and say, we have got some concerns about what you're doing here. And I know the legislation can change pretty quickly and we may not exist, but it's worth having that conversation.
And I'll leave that to Chair Swiggs. From a chief executive's perspective, I still have the responsibility that environmental limits will need to be in this chapter. And I still have some of the best planning talent in the entire country in this organization. And I think their brains need to be on this alongside the science brains. There is nothing telling me that I am wasting money. What I will also say, though, is that I have made it very clear to the district and city councils that while we all pay into secretariat fees, if that pushes this council doing more work, while also my politicians who have not been removed from office are still here, I will then need to charge them for said role. And I have made that very clear in other settings.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie, you'll be delighted to have a final 20 seconds on this topic.
Can you just remind me what the question was?
What sort of committee structure would best help Canterbury make regional decisions while still making sure districts are heard and mana whenua are genuine partners?
So I was cognizant of the chair's comments. I quite like what John said, and I would endorse that we have perhaps an advisory role to our territorial mayors and people. And then I followed the logic of Councillor Mackay here's logic, and that is that we actually need to sort the structure out before we start writing plans. And I can't get past that a bit. But I guess, just to be very brief, that if we can use the existing sub-regional plans and the Greater Christchurch Plan and those sorts of instruments we already have got some community understanding of and support for, then that could be a useful start in terms of helping the mayors deliver on the spatial plan.
Thank you very much, Councillor Mackenzie. Let's move on to slide number 8, staff. Thank you.
Great. So the last two slides that I'm going to cover look at what the regional spatial plan is, and then we have a look at what non-statutory spatial plans are and kind of have a discussion about the difference. So what the regional spatial plan is likely to look like, it's likely to be primarily a map-based document, but we also know it's going to be supported by some text to help with the implementation of those policy directions. At the moment, it's going to set a 30-year development pattern, so it's going to look at your infrastructure corridors, things like energy, where development goes, and some key constraints. It's going to show the where and when for development within the environmental limits and constraints. So this spatial plan is going to involve both regional council functions as well as district council functions. And it's going to be the basis for land use and the natural environment chapters of the regional plan to implement those policies in that direction through the aligned rules and methods. And I just wanted to cover off the two functions of the regional spatial plan because I think that the first part, the spatial direction, is quite well understood, but the second part, the integration, is less well understood, and it's a really key part of how this new system is going to have to work. So we are going to be identifying areas for growth. It's going to be identifying constraints and all the transport networks, that sort of thing. But it also needs to set the policy direction that the land use and natural environment chapters have to implement. Not the same as the regional policy statement, but a similar function in terms of tying together the two rule frameworks that sit underneath it. So it's a really key document to get right, and a really key document to have at that regional scale. It's going to reduce the risk of conflicting settings and late stage rework. So it's going to be a really important document to make sure that the land use that the district councils are going to be having in rules for enable the regional council to achieve its environmental protection objectives.
Thank you very much. I'm about to jump in with another question, and a quick game's a good game, so I'm going to give us all just a few seconds, but I'd really like to take the pulse of the room, because that's really important and will inform us going forward. So when growth, infrastructure and environmental limits conflict, what should give way first and why? Councillor Mackay, you had your hand up first.
So I think that the whole framework's set up so that environmental limits do set the bottom lines, and that those other like growth and infrastructure should be then operating within those bottom lines. And I'm pretty sure that we actually were pretty clear in the select committee that we saw those environmental limits as bottom lines, whereas I think there's section 51C or whatever it was, or B or D, said that you could actually have exceptions to the environmental bottom lines, and we said, well, that's not good enough. You should set them, and that should be them. The part that I find really challenging when thinking about that, though, is in the timeline of things, the environmental limits aren't going to be set before the spatial plans are required. So we're going to have to circle back around and do the whole spatial planning exercise again, because the timeline's not lining up. So hopefully they get that right through the select committee process.
Okay, sorry. Councillor Davis, and then Councillor Robinson, then Councillor Campbell.
Thanks. I see it as, I always see everything as carrying capacity. So it's all three. And because development follows infrastructure, environmental outcomes follows infrastructure and development. And we do have a carrying capacity in our region, in our cities, in our towns. Kind of depends on infrastructure, but it also depends on the environment. So it's a way, I don't think you can separate it out. That's unfortunately. So you could set the environmental limit, you'll have problems. You actually, it has to be integrated. So I don't know how we.
Councillor Robinson.
I think it's a tricky one, because I think there's more than one bottom line sometimes. I think there needs to be like a catch-all scenario where it might actually trigger everything that could happen, possible scenarios, especially in a 30-year plan, where environmental limits may actually go from a precautionary approach to an absolute bottom line. There's no, this is a threshold. So I think I'm stuck in a middle ground. I think I'm always more for the environment, but I think there needs to be a conclusion where sometimes things go through with a little bit of flexibility, but not always.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Campbell.
My position will come as no surprise to anyone. Environmental limits first. We live in an environment, nothing can happen without it. We muck with it, it mucks with us. You've got to have infrastructure for growth. So I personally think if you get the environmental limits right and you work with the infrastructure within those environmental limits and working with it, then you set us up for growth. So that's where I go.
Thank you, Councillor Ward.
fast game's a good game. So I'm against environmental limits. I mean, I've always, even though I've been an intensive farmer all my life, I've always been very passionate about the environment. But I believe that those environment limits also give us our growth and our infrastructure.
Thank you. Very quick. Anyone else? Councillor Mackenzie.
Yeah, I'm just going to scratch the well-worn record. The purpose of environmental limits is to set the parameters by which you do your development, and it's as simple as that. So infrastructure is a way of accommodating growth by way of protecting your environmental limits. And what you just got to be very careful of, that the environmental limits don't stop you from doing the investing in infrastructure, such as water storage or whatever it is, to enable the growth.
Thank you. Councillor Moody.
Yeah, I think I'm fairly aligned with Councillor Mackenzie on this one. I think something like set environmental guardrails, environmental bottom lines, and then say to society and industry, okay, within those guardrails, go hard. Make us money, innovate, do your thing. As long as we stay within that safe space for our air, land, and water.
Thank you, Councillor Gerard.
So yes, I agree with these fellow councillors. I see the environmental limits as a means of sustaining our economy and our society. So and whenever I have worked with developers, it's always sort of working with the environment, whatever you do. And it's integrating with the environment.
Thank you, Councillor Davies.
I just have a question, like slightly tangential, just around the idea of a map-led kind of planning document. Have there been signals around like how the form of that may be? Are we going to be looking at traditional static documents or possibly interactive digital?
There's been a signal that there will be some kind of e-plan, but we don't really know what that looks like as yet. But here in Environment Canterbury as well, we're really thinking hard about how we can make a much more interactive, sort of useful set of map layers rather than kind of a massive book of maps that are going to be really hard to work with. Yeah.
And just supplementary, so will that come through national standards?
It will, but we're not sure the extent to which it will be standardised. Yeah.
Thank you, Deputy Cranwell.
Kia ora. Yeah, similar to others, get the environmental limits right or correct, and then develop the growth and infrastructure around those. Kia ora.
Excellent. Let's move on. Oh, sorry, Chair Swiggs.
I have one question around the spatial plan, the map led. Does the spatial planning integrate with the Spatial Planning Act, the recent one that came out not so long ago, and is that going to be overridden or?
That Spatial Planning Act was repealed and has been, so it was repealed. We went back to the RMA, and these will replace the RMA.
Councillor Gerard, just very quickly, we've got 3 more slides to get through.
Okay, can I ask a question? Once we've done our spatial plan, and it would be all in GIS, I'm just wondering whether it could be something that is more of I know it's out there question, and you won't be able to answer it, but could it be like a live document so that when something big happens, like Cyclone Gabriel or whatever, that things can actually be, with the data can be all put in and suddenly, okay, let's have to rearrange things here and put a bridge over there or whatever. And so
I think that's really something that we've been investigating quite deeply within the SER program, and it's not that. So we kind of have to be careful about sort of what can change and what can't within a planning set of planning provisions. So I guess the limits and the where things are within that spatial plan would be static on the maps. But if things happen, like as limits get close to being reached, or allocation happens, or say a river changes its course, those kinds of things, we would like to be able to represent that and sort of as it happens, so that people that are using the plans in the end actually have much better information, so that they're able to we just get a cheaper, faster, better process out the other end of it is really the intent.
Thank you. Slide 9.
Great. So where do non-statutory spatial plans fit? And so the Greater Christchurch Partnership is a really good example of one of them. But across the region, there was about 22 different spatial documents. The district plans also have a lot of spatial elements in them. So when we've considered what might be useful in terms of informing the new spatial plan, the regional spatial plan, we've considered a lot of that data. Non-statutory spatial plans provide long-term visions for growth. They help to connect some infrastructure outcomes and support alignment across the districts or the region, depending on the scale of the plan. They also include some government partners, like Ministry of Health, that sort of group. So it helps to help encompass all of the kind of relevant groups that need to be making decisions for a spatial plan. What the spatial plan, the non-statutory spatial plans are not, is they're not plans that create binding rules that the regional or district plans have to give effect to. They also haven't been developed with consideration of all of the mandatory matters that are required to be considered when that stuff's being developed. So there's things, one of the mandatory matters are the spatial implications of environmental limits, and that's going to be quite a massive one, and that's not something that was needed to be considered at the time, because the Greater Christchurch Spatial Plan wasn't designed to be a statutory document to inform planning decisions. And so the information in the Greater Christchurch Spatial Plan is going to be important to look at and use, but there might need to be some adjustments and some considerations to make sure that it is going to align with the new regulatory system, so that it is able to have that decision-making power behind it and it's got the right evidence to support it. The decision makers are going to need to be put forward with all of the options available to them when they're going to make a decision on what the policy direction is. So in terms of whether they're ready to go as a spatial plan, they wouldn't be suitable to use as they are as the regional spatial plan, but the information they hold and some of the data that sits behind it is going to be really important to look at and really useful.
Thank you very much. I've got a wee question, and I will, after I ask my question, would love some very impactful and incredibly brief responses from councillors, because we've still got a couple to get through. So what existing spatial planning work in Canterbury is genuinely useful to build from, and what needs to be retested under the new statutory framework? Who's going to kick me off? Councillor Faulkner.
Going back into the zone implementation plans that we developed early on, they're getting rather old. Could they be taken and refreshed in a rather simple process with community and slipped into this process?
Yep. Okay, who else? Anybody? Deputy Cronwell.
Well, the spatial work included in it, the regional policy statement that we've spent years on, a lot of mahi in and around that. So I'm sure that can be used and brought forward and into the planning ahead.
Okay, good. We might jump into slides 10 and 11, and then I have another little question. Thanks.
Right, so this is really just a bit of a summary of the work that's underway at the moment at a staff level. So sort of mid to late last year, the Merrill Forum asked staff to go away and do a stock take of the strategies and plans that we have in place that could inform the spatial plan. So that work was done last year. We're now building on that stock take and sort of understanding exactly what Amanda was talking about with the Greater Christchurch spatial plan, but actually for all of the spatial plans and strategies and information, the zips, all of that sort of work. What is kind of fit for purpose out of that, and what can we take forward? What do we need? Where are the gaps? What do we need to do a bit more work on? So that work's ongoing. We're developing an initial sort of shared baseline understanding as well of what are the map layers that we've got, what are the assumptions that sit behind those map layers, what are the methods that have been used to develop those map layers, and how much confidence do we have that they're the correct map layers. So we're doing that work. We're also identifying sort of priority gaps in both evidence and in mapping. So what maps don't we have? We know we've got some mandatory matters that we need to map. What don't we have mapped? We have to map environmental limits. So there's some thinking to be done around how we do that. But what are the other gaps that we have there? We're also doing some early translation checks. So how can we take our existing limits that we've got developed through the CWMS process or developed through other processes? How do we take those and translate them into a combined plan? Where does that policy direction or those outcomes, how are they best expressed through a planning system which has some sort of very non-discretionary direction at the top, and then some sort of more discretionary areas as we go through, and where is the right place to express those policy outcomes and those policy approaches. We're connecting with our partner councils, including through Te Uru Kahika, but also really strongly at a staff level within Canterbury as well, to really understand the work that's underway, how we can support that work, and how it sort of all links together. And we're developing work programs and options within Environment Canterbury to support these future decisions, but particularly around our functions as well. So,
yeah, continue.
Okay. So we're also looking at how data and evidence can be prepared for future spatial planning. So again, looking at what our baselines are, collating and standardising that data. So at the moment, just as a bit of a hangover from a lot of sub-regional work, we might express limits slightly differently in different parts of the region. So we're understanding how we can consolidate that and be a bit more consistent across the region. We're looking at again, testing and identifying gaps in our information, and prioritising what evidence we'll collect next. So, and that'll be in places like absolutely, for example, we know that there's quite a lot of evidence we still need to be gathering in the coast, and there's probably quite a lot of information that we've gathered over the past 15, 20 years that we can just still lean on when it comes to fresh water. So
lovely. And if we look at the timeframes on the next slide, and then I'll have a question.
Yeah. Again, timeframes pretty breakneck for planning, but really, I think the key ones there are we've got until early 2028 to have a regional spatial plan decided on, and then another not even quite 12 months after that, getting to, well, maybe it is 12 months, late 2029, when we've got a natural environment chapter also decided on. So these are pieces of work that have to be done concurrently, because we're not going to have time to get the spatial work done and then do the natural environment stuff. So, yeah, I think the concern about having to do spatial plan and limit setting in different steps. In reality, they're just going to have to be done concurrently.
Thank you. And I know the excitement in the room is palpable. There's questions everywhere. I would please just hold them to the end, because I do want to ask this question, and then I'll open it up for extremely brief, wonderful questions. So here we go. What evidence gaps do councillors most want filled before we are asked to support major spatial choices? Councillor Campbell, then Councillor Faulkner.
This fits in perfectly with a question that I just wrote down, and which I've asked before. Our Section 35 review. If we need that information, because it needs to come in here, and I still want to know where it is and how far along it is before we get it, so that we can use that.
Thank you, Councillor Faulkner.
A question to give clarity in my mind around evidence, and Lisa, you'll be familiar with the Hiranui. So we had irrigation areas categorised from permitted to non-complying to prohibited, and then we had Lake Sumner taken off the table, so that's all written in the plans. The spatial planning process, if there was a desire to review those and alter them, how would that fit into the planning process, spatial planning?
Yeah, I mean, they will have to just come through as options. And at the moment, I guess we're trying to develop sort of approach options. They're at a broad scale. I don't know that at the moment we're looking at a sort of a catchment scale as to those sort of local options. At the moment, we probably need to start on that. It'll kind of get all fed in through as options. But.
Yeah, I probably wasn't quite clear. If some developers came in, the world's changed in 15 years, as I said before, and there were storage options that were wanted by parties, can they just feed that into the spatial planning process?
Yes, I think so. And I think we need to be working really closely with infrastructure providers as we go through this as well, and also just different industries. I think we're going to be needing to work really closely with, say, the aquaculture industry, the gravel industry, just to understand, how we can provide for growth in those areas in a way that sort of fits within the limits as well. But yeah, absolutely, water storage is a big part of that.
Thank you. Councillor Mackay, then Councillor Scott.
That's great that you mentioned industry, because the question was about what information gaps, before we decide on spatial planning, what goes where. Then to me, I go, well, what's industry need? That's really important, and what different industries need. Next is understanding cumulative environmental impacts on freshwater in particular, so that we can determine what should go near freshwater and what activities, where. The other part that is a little bit missing in my mind, so if a plan was turned up right here today to go, right, approve this is going to be this zone with these activities, it's understanding climate impact or long-term climate impact, what's going to shift where or what's predicted to shift where when in the region. Kind of my main drivers of missing gaps of information in my head.
Thank you. Councillor Scott.
So one of the things I think that we struggled with, and we spoke about this morning actually in the circus, is we still haven't got our heads around public good science that is accepted by everybody, which is the basis for making some of these decisions about the environmental limits. So the stuff that should be there that we will accept it. Yes, that is the thing. And I mean, we're losing Tim, so maybe that's a challenge. And also, I don't think we've quite solved how we share data. We spoke about that this morning. We spoke about data. How can we actually turn the data we have? And we've got an issue down in Temuka at the moment, just trying to look at water use, see what the opportunity is down there. how do we use that in the same way that we use health data, which is non-specific?
Very good point. Thank you, Councillor Moody. Very briefly.
I'll be as brief as Councillor Davis. So, looking at these boxes, I mean, where does the off-ramp or decision point for whether we have these spatial plans kick in? You know, where's the point where it's like, oh, okay, no, they're going forward now? Is it before or after the election? I'm just not quite clear. It looks like it might be before.
Yeah, we're expecting the bills to land and become acts, receive royal assent before the election, so sort of mid-year. And I'd say spatial plans have also been, they've been on the menu for successive governance. So I don't think spatial plans are going away regardless of what happens in the general election.
And the spatial planning, might be similar, like to both sides of the government, like this sort of model that we're...
Thank you. Councillor Robinson.
I would actually like to see an expansion of the very good project, the Ionado, the map, Ionado, of the seafloor mapping in Banks Peninsula. I'd like to see that expanded to cover, every area would be good, but, to include sort of our coastal environment, but also mapping that shows emerging issues and things we need to actually have identified at a spatial level for navigational reasons, incidents, fisheries, all sorts of things that could actually feed into what we do better. And exactly what Ashley brought up was the Section 35 work and where that's at, and has it identified anything that we should be over now, let alone in 30, the going forward. And also the other thing was identifying areas that potentially have adverse effects now that could be changed, in the further picture, like retirement of land or things like that.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mackenzie, then Cranwell, then Davis, and then we've got one more slide. Can you wait till the end, Councillor Jared? Yep.
So I think the areas where the TAs will reflect on the deficiencies of our current plans, rules and regulations, are where those rules and regulations are getting in the way of A, environmental delivery, B, development which doesn't affect the environment, and C, where the rules and regulations just doesn't reflect the community view. And I can think of lots of examples of those, but the Ashburton River Plan is a major example of that, which is getting in the way of quite a lot of the things that the Ashburton District Council, as an example, will want to review and address to deliver some of the outcomes the community want. So I imagine that's the reflection that'll come through in this process.
Thank you. Great. Deputy Cranwell.
Kia ora. Yeah, when we were in the circus this morning, Nicholas and myself were on the same timeline for once, and we're talking about land use and then correct right place, right activity, and then thinking about what's happening, in South Canterbury, further down south, just refarming activities, etc. So yeah, that'll be one for me. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Councillor Davis.
I have a bunch of stuff written down, but it's been covered a lot. I'm thinking water consumption, but then wetlands and the quality of the water coming off those wetlands, and then, of course, sediment in that. But one thing I'm concerned about is the data, and the other thing is that it's public perception, okay? So we should probably be seen as the leaders. You need to trust us, but when our data is coming from the irrigation schemes, it's a problem. So it's a way that we get as much data and quality data in the right way that the public trusts, that actually is informing all those good environmental decisions that we're making. Because I have a fear that when we set environmental limits, and thresholds that people will just operate, any industry, it's not just farming, any industry will operate just below the limit, and then we'll have a big cumulative effect and will tip over into a place that we can't come back from. So I'm very concerned about setting a limit and then everyone working up to that. Let's the speed limit, right? And then you just go just below. So that's my biggest concern, actually.
Thank you very much, Councillor Davis. I'm going to, Councillor Gerard, we've only got 2 minutes, and I'll give you, you've got oodles of time in a second. So the last slide, if we could jump into the last slide, and this really will be so helpful for our committee going forward. So it says, what role does Council's Strategy and Policy Committee have? What role does this committee want to play in shaping this work rather than simply receiving updates? Rock and roll, go. Councillor Mackay.
I'll go first then. I'll go first. What do we want to do? Look, I see value in this committee being able to actually have discussions about what the political trade-offs might be, and then being able to particularly give guidance to the chair on what sits right with us, so that when he's going into mayoral forums, not that it's a decision-making role, but it's a group, but it definitely is influential, then he will be able to know where our comfort sits and what we're trading.
Thank you, Councillor. Anyone else? Don't all speak at once? Nope. Councillor Gerard, you had a question from before.
I was thinking about future land uses, because we don't know the future. You know, today it's all dairy, tomorrow it might be kangaroos, you know, or data centres. You know, that there's all these pressures that we have when a land, what would you say, a sector takes off, and it's that unknown parameters and effects that we have to work with. How do you think this spatial plan will work with the unknown?
I mean, I think that's a bit where the power comes from, the constraints mapping and having the limits really clear to say, you know, we kind of don't know how you live within those limits. We're not going to tell everyone how to live within those limits, but these are the limits that we need to live within. So if kangaroos are better for, are better for the limits than data centres, then, you know, that's the one that wins. But yeah, and I think there's also, within spatial planning, there's always the element of opportunity. You know, there's constraints mapping, but I mean, we could always go towards more opportunities mapping as well, if that's where we want to go.
Thank you, Councillor Sunkel.
Yeah, could be more effective than the RMA that we've got.
Councillor Sunkel.
Thank you. In our conversation at Lincoln yesterday, we were talking about tertiary education, university, and one of the roles is the ideas, so the modelling, the testing, the ground truthing, and so I see the opportunity for this committee for the officers to come back and test their thinking within this conversation. It's not necessarily for us to lead, but the ability to be informed of, test the thinking. Are we travelling in a workshop kind of manner, which then we all kind of know where we're travelling, yes, without being absolutely directive.
Very good. Thank you, Councillor Robinson.
Very briefly, I would like to see strategy and planning have a strategic lens and address key risks of the effects of any activity in our region, not just farming, but industry, everything, and actually oversee everything risk-based, and drive accordingly some of the key issues that we all identify in our own communities.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Anyone else, or else we will be closing for today. Who's on karakia? Councillor Faulkner.
Kia mutua matoa mahi mo tēnei wā. Mana ki kataia mai matou katoa o matoa hai o matoa whanau e o ki te aorangi. Our work is finished for the moment. Bless us all, our colleagues, our families. Peace to the universe.
Kia ora, thank you very much for today.